Hi, I'm Eddie Burke. I've been the bartender at the Hollywood Improv for 40 years, and this is my podcast, Eddie's Bar at the Improv. All right, guys, this is Eddie Burke. This is Eddie's Bar at the Improv podcast without the bar because we are in pandemic mode as usual. And when you see me, you will see my pandemic beard, which is about to come off because I've had enough of it. And you'll also see my little black eye because I had eye surgery and nobody hit me. I haven't been out. I've been good. Not even Alonzo. I haven't threatened, hurt anybody, but here I am. And my special guest today is Alonzo Bodden. I am really excited. Alonzo, thank you so much for doing this.
Now, Eddie, you know you went to Whole Foods without a mask and someone punched you in the eye. Tell them the truth, Eddie. Tell them what happened.
I thought you weren't. Yeah, why did you say that? Come on, man. It's like, that's not the kind of thing I would do. All right, so I did it. But, the guy just turned around and clocked me. But we'll deal with that. Hey, before we really get into, like, your comedy career, which is you've got so many different aspects of it, I want to go back into where you came from. Yeah. You are from Queens, New York.
Yes. And
you attended, I believe, aviation high school.
Right. Very good, Eddie. Yeah, I grew up in Southeast Queens, Jamaica, Queens. Went to aviation high school, and graduated. Was hired by Lockheed in Burbank, and that brought me to LA.
How did that bring you? You worked for Lockheed here?
Yeah. When I graduated, 79, and then actually I went back in 80, there were 2 licenses to work on an airplane. So I went back to school for 1 semester after graduation to get the second license. So I was a licensed airplane mechanic. Lockheed had hired hundreds of guys from my school because we were trained. And to them, it was a jackpot. They were like, what? These kids know aircraft? Like, we don't have to train them. We can put them on the line. So it was a wave in 1980 of hundreds of guys coming out from New York. And it was kind of like, oh, you got an apartment? Yeah. Well, I'll crash with you for 2 weeks till I get started working. And then, kind of tag teamed and helped each other out. And that's how I came to LA. So I've been here in July will be 40 years. I moved here July of 1980.
Well, you are a native because that means you spent more than half your life here. That's how I consider myself a native at this point.
I've been here long enough to complain. Like, you know what I mean? Like, I remember when the 405 was empty. I remember blah, blah, blah. Like, I've been here that long. I've been here long enough that if I had any sense in the 80s, I'd have bought 2 houses and I wouldn't even be talking to you right now.
And I wouldn't blame you. But just for a little correction, the 405 has never been empty, ever. I've been here since '76, and that sucker has never been empty. So Lockheed brought you here, and how long did you work for Lockheed?
Well, I was at Lockheed for about 4 years, and then I got laid off, which was the nature of that business. And let's see, I through the 80s, I worked at various aircraft companies. I did contract work for McDonnell Douglas. I was the mechanic for Continental Airlines for a while. I went back to Lockheed twice. You get laid off, you come back, you get laid off and leave again. And ultimately, I bounced around the country doing some what we call job shopping, which is like a temporary aircraft worker. So that was actually fun. I did recovery and modification. So when you hear about a plane going off a runway or 2 planes collide on the ground, I was part of the team that would fix those planes. And it was like a giant insurance job. Like, there were engineers and people that went out and they looked at the plane and they were like, okay, it's going to cost $20 million to fix, but it's $100 million plane, so we'll fix it. And then they would send out the crew of guys, me and other guys, and we might put a wing on an airplane, put a new landing gear on, do something. So I bounced around doing that for a couple of years and got to live in different places. I was in New York for a while. I was in Dallas, Puerto Rico, Oakland, and all it did was confirm I wanted to live in LA. Bouncing around the country, I was like, yeah, LA is where I want to be. And I ended up at McDonnell Douglas in Long Beach training new employees. They had a big program going on. They were hiring people from unemployment and giving them the basics of sheet metal work, drilling holes, riveting.
You were now training people. Okay.
I'm training people. And that's where the comedy came in, because I had more fun making them laugh than I did, with the technical stuff. And I always had a sense of humor, but I had never been in front of people. So when I started doing the class, getting in front of the classroom was the most natural thing in the world. Just no nervousness, no stage fright. And after doing that for a couple of years, I was like, yeah, I want to try being a comic. Like, it was, that's how it came about.
Okay, that's interesting, because that's where I was going to go with that, was how you got started. And so what did you do in terms of like, okay, now I want to do comedy. Where did you go? Where did you start?
Girlfriend at the time gave me an ad for this comedy writing class because I didn't know how comics came up with material. I was like, yeah, I'm funny talking to an aircraft class about airplanes, but how do you just come up with material? So there was a guy named Len Ostrovich who wrote for Rich Jenny. And I know you remember Rich. Rich was
Yes, I do. Mm-hmm.
brilliant, absolutely great comic. But anyway, Len had this class, and I don't remember the theater. It was a little theater in Santa Monica. And you go for 6 weeks, and graduation is a 5-minute set. And I did that. And his theory was write down a story, then start taking out what isn't funny. And by the end, you have a funny story, right? So when I did that 5 minutes, Eddie, I was absolutely hooked. I walked off that stage and I was like, I'm going to be a comic. That was the only thought I had. And I already knew I was getting laid off by McDonnell Douglas. So when I got laid off,
sounds like the story of your life, or anybody.
Well, it was the nature of that business,
Mm-hmm.
So when I got laid off in January '93, I made an agreement with myself that I wasn't going to fix airplanes again. I was going to do whatever it took to pursue comedy, and that's how it started.
That's great. That is such a beautiful story, in the sense that, most guys, they've like, well, since I'm 10 years old, I wanted to be a comic. I always thought I would, a stand-up or whatever. And you just kind of like naturally segued into comedy because of the fact that you are so personable and funny, and then just took it and went with it. And
yeah, I tell people I live a dream I didn't have. That's what it is. And sometimes I wonder what would have happened if I had pursued it like right out of school, because who knows, right? Right. It was the 80s. George Wallace always gives me shit about it. He's like, man, you good. You would have made a lot of money in the 80s. You good. He said, I made a lot of money. You ain't make no money, but you would have made some money. And he reminds me how rich he is.
George is one of the first comics I met when I started working at the Improv in 1979. I love George. Did you have comedy idols? Not idols, people that you admired in the world of comedy before you started, when you started?
Well, again, I wasn't thinking about being a comic, so there were comics I liked, but I didn't look at them and like, I want to be this guy, you know what I mean? Because I wasn't thinking about it that way. But the guys who, once I started, and even before I started, there were certain guys that I looked at that were amazing. Robin Harris was amazing. Robin was the quickest I'd ever, he was just so quick that it was great. Carlin was brilliant. I to this day, I think Carlin is the greatest ever at social observation. And as you know, as everyone in comedy knows, the shame of everything there's a number of bad things, obviously, but one of the shames as a comic about Bill Cosby is losing his comedy legacy. Because at that time, Cosby was the greatest. He was the one. I would watch Himself, that HBO special he did. And it was like, this is a master class just
I
to
know.
watch him sit
I
there.
think about that about him too. It's like here's a guy that we all watched for 100 years, who was just phenomenal. He was so relaxed and so comfortable up on stage, and he was just great. And then, unfortunately, all the rest of the stuff, and that's what he's going to be remembered for, instead
Yeah,
of the fact that he also had one of the best sitcoms ever that
right.
was on TV. That was, I have I don't want to call it a theory, but whether you're black, white, or green, if you have a funny sitcom, it doesn't matter what ethnicity, whatever you are. You watch that, you could have put a white family in there and it would have been the same, in the sense that it was that good. It was that
Well,
funny.
yeah. Well, I mean, he did what you would call the ultimate crossover in that he became America's dad.
Yes,
It
yes,
wasn't like America's black dad or this,
right.
like he was America's dad. Everybody, if you didn't have a dad like Cosby, you wanted one.
Right.
He was the role model, right? He
Mhm.
was smart and funny. He could be disciplined, but he could also be insightful, quiet. Just all of these qualities, you'd be like, man, what. So
You
yeah,
know,
so he did that, and then unfortunately threw it all away.
yeah, that just reminded me of a story that I don't think if I've ever mentioned before. When I was a kid, I was born and raised in Manhattan, and my friend and I were down in Riverside Drive Park, and there were these guys, two men and hitting a ball to a kid or whatever. And my friend and I went over and asked if we could play or whatever. And lo and behold, who are these two men? Bill Cosby and Harry Belafonte. I think the kid was Harry Belafonte's child or something like that. And it's like, it was just a magical moment. I mean, there were two icons in the business period and they were just a lot of fun to watch, to be around. They were just such nice people. When you started comedy, when did you start to get ahead, where people started recognizing the fact that you were so good?
You know, for one thing, and again, this is great because you understand this. I tell everyone I started in LA because I didn't know I wasn't supposed to.
Right. Well, that goes back to the, sorry, Mike, just knocked over my mic, and I knew I would. To the where George Wallace told you that you should have started in the 80s and all that. No, you shouldn't,
So
because this is when it was meant to be.
yeah, that's true. So I did an open mic at the Laugh Factory, and Jamie hired me to be a doorman, and it was like you'll get spots when people don't show up or whatever. So I'm at the door every night just hoping, that Damon Wayans has car trouble or something.
Right.
So anyway, I'm going up and I'm doing my, 3 minutes, 5 minutes here and there. Fraser Smith was the first guy who plucked me out. Fraser was like, who is this guy? Why is he, and he hired me. He used to do a show called Fraser Smith After Midnight. It was every Friday at the Laugh Factory. It was on KLSX radio. And he hired me to do his warm up every week. So
Oh,
I
cool.
would do, it was great because I did like 5 new minutes every week. But that's when I started to be around comics. And I think comics saw me, like, oh, this guy's kind of good. Like this,
As a comic instead of a
Um,
doorman.
but the real big first break I had, and I always say this is when I became a comic. At 4 years, I got booked at New Faces in Montreal at Just for Laughs.
Wow.
And I went up to New Faces. Dom Herrera was the host of my set. I had a killer set. I ended up getting a deal and all of that, which was great because I could quit the day job, right? Financially, I was,
Yeah.
but a bigger deal to me was guys like Dom, Chris Titus. Um, there were so many, Barry Katz, and on. They came up to me, and now they were talking to me as a comic. Like I was no longer a doorman or an open mic or any. Like now, they were talking to me as a comic. So that was huge for me because now I was in the fraternity.
Right.
That was a big change.
The feeling is, I would imagine, as you just said, now I am a comedian and I am accepted by comedians as a comedian.
Right,
And
because as an open micer, I did well. And people recognize. I used to do a lot of the East LA shows, and I knew all of those guys. Rudy Moreno and Willie Barcena and that whole crew, and I would work with them. And I was working and doing stuff around town, and definitely doing those $50 gigs and stuff like. I tell people, I remember the first time Gabe Iglesias bounced into the Bicycle Club, right? It was like a
really,
Thursday night open mic. You'd get like $25 and dinner or something like this. And this big, giant 10-year-old in a Hawaiian shirt and short pants bounces onto the stage, giggling and telling stories. And all of us were like, wow, because he was just, we're like, who is this guy? So that was my the guys I came up with back in the day, back then. But yeah, definitely that. I think as a comic, when you get recognition from the other comics, especially the old pros, that's when you're a comic, right? Because otherwise, when you're the open micer trying to prove you're funny, there's nothing more annoying than that. You see it every night at the bar, Eddie.
that
You
I
see them
do.
there.
Hmm.
They're at the bar. They're not going into the room. They're not doing a
Right.
spot. They're loudly going to try to be the funniest person at the bar.
I know that. And like you said, I see that all the time. And I always want to say to these guys, you need to chill. You wait for your chance. You'll get your chance at open mic. But in the meantime, everybody's looking at you like you're an idiot because all you're doing is being loud. And it's a story that I have told when we used to have, the bar was in the lab, and
Hmm.
I would work while open mic was on. You would inevitably have this one comedian every single time that would get up and go like, whatever, tell a joke, nobody would laugh, and then that line would come out. Come on, guys, that's my best joke. And then, of course, me standing behind the bar listening to this would go like, well, then you need to get off the stage because you're done. Why a comic would ever say that to me, not to me, to an audience, but it's a learning process, as you know better than I. To be a comic in an open mic setting has got to be such a tough thing. I
Well,
watched.
I tell everyone, if you're doing an open mic, if you get a laugh, that's a great joke because no one's there to laugh at you. It's just other comics waiting for their turn to go on,
Right.
right?
That,
But
that
listen, Ed, you're a nicer guy than when I started. There was a place called the LA Cabaret in Encino.
Sure.
And
Mhm.
they did the open mic in the bar. And if the bartender didn't like you, I can't remember his name, but he would fill the blender with ice and just turn.
Oh.
It was like that was when you knew it was he would just fill the blender with ice and turn it on. You're like, all right, I guess I'm done now.
Yeah, I love it. That's a man after my own heart. We don't have blenders, so it's like, oh, that would have been perfect. Uh, when was the first time you played, let's say, the improv?
um, Let me think. My first, I would have to think about the Hollywood Improv, but I'll tell you the first improv I remember was Tempe. I
Okay.
got booked at Tempe. As a matter of fact, I was hosting for Dom. And I'll never forget this because this was my glorious entrance to the Tempe Improv. There's like 4.5 steps to get up on stage, right? and I took 5 steps. You know when you take that full step and there's only a half step, so you almost go. Yeah, that was before I said a word. That was my entrance to the improv. Let me stumble on up here and do it.
Did they at least laugh?
Oh yeah, I laughed about it. It was, it was hilarious.
Yeah.
I'm trying to remember the first time I honestly, the first time I worked Hollywood, I know what it was. I did an open mic, and there was somebody, I want to say it was a guy named Barry Neal. It was maybe but somebody, they said, hey, don't do the open mic at the Improv because you don't want them to think of you as an open micer. Wait until you can go in as a comic. They said, because if they think of you as an open micer, that's what you're going to stay. And at the time, now I don't know if that's true or not true or whatever, but at the time that seemed like good advice. Mm-hmm. So I kind of stayed away from the Improv until I had done the New Faces in Montreal. And then when I came back, I would get to the Improv doing showcase sets,
Right.
So I actually stayed away from it because it was a pro room and I didn't want to be an amateur in a pro room.
Right. I've heard that story before with comics, and to a degree, it certainly is true. It's very hard. Everybody pigeonholes you somewhere. You don't want to be, like you just said, categorized as an open micer. And yes, you have to start somewhere. I guess the Improv's open mic at one point, especially back then, wasn't the place to do it. Now it's a little bit different. Things have changed, but I hear a lot of...
I'm sorry.
I just hear a lot of guys, a lot of open micers talk about the fact that they won't even do the open mic. They'll do the open mic, but they won't do it until they've got the best set they can ever think of instead of developing.
Right. Well, it's different now with the lab because the lab is seen as the development room,
Right.
So that's a bit different. And also back then they had the Santa Monica Club.
Right.
So I did some sets. I went to the Santa Monica Club and I remember going out there with Tommy Davidson because I had been opening for him a lot and doing a spot over there. So my thing at the Improv in those days was random. It wasn't like I was a regular on the list, or it would be just pulled in at random and doing spots until...
Was there any when you performed at the Improv under those circumstances, was there any I get a lot of comics tell me that when the first time they performed there was this great magical feeling. I'm at the Improv. It sounds more like it was just part of the process for you at that point.
Yeah, it was. I mean, obviously, I recognized that I was at the Improv.
Right.
But yeah, it was comfortable, not intimidating. Mm-hmm. It was right. It was a kind of I made it feeling like I've made it up another level. You know what I mean? Right. And one of the good things about starting and coming up in LA, and this definitely happened, it was a specific lesson I got at the Laugh Factory one night. So Rodney Dangerfield went up. Yes. And this comic went up after, and she was talking about Rodney. And George Lopez was there. And George, he just kind of leaned over and told me, he said, listen, if somebody famous goes up, don't mention them. Everyone knows who they are. You do you. You do your thing. So when I'd work and when I'd go to the Improv, and who knows, right, who you go on after, because in those days it was George Lopez and it was Damon Wayans and it was, whoever, right? So you don't know who you're going on. And the crowd, they recognize, say it's Damon, they recognize Damon as a star. They don't know that I've only been doing it for 3 years, you know? So I just go on and try to be me and do what I do so it wasn't, I wasn't nervous because I knew like this is my chance to be me on this stage. And the other thing is the improv was easier than the back of a bookstore in you
Yeah.
know in Reseda. You know what I mean? Like it was like, wait a minute, these people are actually here to, and you learn that the first couple of times, you're like, oh wait, these people came here to laugh. They didn't come to have a cup of coffee, and I'm not interrupting them.
That's interesting. I haven't heard it put that way, but that has to be 100% true because it's like these people are here for comedy, and I'm going to make them laugh. Whereas, in between pages, they may look up at you at the bookstore. But that's phenomenal. I mean, I love the fact that for you, it's been part of the process as opposed to now I've made it. But you were already on your way, and you had a certain level of professionalism at that
Yeah,
point.
and again, that was the education I got from being around pros.
Hmm.
And another thing that Tommy told me that also made a difference, and this is why I didn't hang out at the improv. Okay, because a lot of people, they just hang out at the bar and this and
Right.
that. Tommy told me, he said, listen, you're better off doing 20 minutes on stage in Riverside than watching me do 20 minutes at the improv. Like, what are you going to learn watching me? He said, don't sit here and watch me. Go somewhere where you can get on stage.
Yeah.
So I did that a lot. And that's like I said, we were joking earlier about where is Magnolia, California. There
Uh-huh.
isn't a town in California I didn't work. People like, yeah, you ever been to Hemet? Hemet,
Except
Wednesday,
Magnolia.
blah, 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 or Vacaville, or Vic. Most people don't know there's a Vacaville and a Victorville. Yeah, I know.
That's true because whether it's comedy or sports or whatever the field is that you're in, it's like watching other people serves its purpose. But what you really want to do is perform or play or whatever, because that's where you learn is
Yeah,
when you're performing. Because you want to watch what Tommy does and you go like, okay, you may in your mind analyze it, but you realize that's not me.
exactly.
That's him.
And I think when I really started being around the improv, getting comfortable around the improv, a lot of it had to do with Judy. When I started getting to know Judy Brown Marmel,
Hmm.
I have to use her full title now because she's one of the queens of the comedy industry.
Yes, she
But
is.
this is back when Judy was doing Aspen and all of that stuff, and so somehow I kind of got to know her. I had a manager who knew her, and I would just be there, and I'd go up. I don't even know if she was working directly with the club yet or what the status was, but I do remember her back in those days. I remember Erin, and
Hmm.
and I remember my early improv career was um, opening or featuring for somebody. So I'd like on Thursday and Sunday, I might get to close, but then I was a feature Friday and Saturday,
Right.
so that was my weekend at the Improv, and that was, the Brea Club and the Irvine Club. And then doing that, I did more road improv than Hollywood in the beginning. And that's kind of how I got into the Hollywood Club because they knew me as a feature in the road clubs.
It's kind of funny because so many people that do the road clubs still cannot get up at the Hollywood Club. Why, or whatever, I have no idea. I'm not in that part of the whole thing, but it's always amazed me when guys will come in and go like, I just worked Addison or Tempe or whatever, sold it out, blah, blah, blah. And they're going like, I can't get up here. I can't even get 5 minutes. I don't know the answer to that. That's know my job, man. It's like I watch you, I enjoy you, but at the same time, I have nothing to say about that. Alonzo, you're like your career. You've God, you have done a lot of hosting on the radio. Um, I think you are still hosting. Do you still do the NPR show?
I still do Wait, Wait, Don't Tell Me. I'm not the host, I'm a panelist. I still get to host. You know, the hosting thing is something I fell into. Uh, I didn't I didn't like try to be a host or whatever.
Hmm.
I got to hired to host some different things and I was just good at it. So it was kind of a natural thing. I had fun with it and I could work in the moment. I think one of the big things about being a host is you got to be able to work in the moment because you don't know what's going to happen. Someone
Right.
might be late and you have to fill time. The microphone might not work. It was always those kind of things that I could somehow keep the show going and roll with whatever direction it went. So I started getting picked up to host different things. The NPR world, which is a very fun world for me, that came up. I don't. Somebody heard me doing some topical stuff, and a woman named Pat Morrison. She had a show in Pasadena called Comedy Congress, and it was comics. We would make fun of the news, and she brought me in with Ben Glebe and Greg Proops. And I always said that my only job here is to explain to you what Proops just said. The man is too smart for anyone to understand at first glance, you know. And we,
Yeah.
we had fun doing that. And then the NPR world, they kind of liked me. They were like, oh, you know, so I think it was the fact that I could combine stand up with news because
Right.
NPR is a very dry world. So I could make it funny, but I could also make it funny within the parameters of NPR, which is, you know, don't go dirty. And I don't know if
Politically correct
eyebrows the
to a
right
degree.
word, but you know, so that happened. And then just for laughs, they started using me as a host for like New Faces and um, different shows like that. So yeah, I fell into it. I love doing it, you know, when not all the time, but for a lot of shows, it's fun being a host.
It's interesting. Would you ever consider or have you thought about maybe having and I'm not talking about money or whatever, but actually being a host like a Tonight Show host or whatever.
Oh, Eddie, that's my dream show. My dream show is a topical comedy show, and I've pitched it in so many different ways. I pitched it as a topical hosting for topical stand-ups on a weekly basis. I was in development with Headline News, HLN,
Hmm.
to do kind of a weekly show, and you know how this business is. My guy got fired. You know, the guy who was shepherding my show got fired, which means my show goes into the do not touch pile because the next executive doesn't want to be involved with anything the previous executive did. You know, it's kind of like the president, right?
Right. I could never figure that out. I every time somebody does get fired, all of their projects are just in the trash.
Right.
Yet, and some of those projects go on to other networks or outlets and become great big hits, and people just get so scared for the same reason that you just said. It's like, I'm not touching anything this guy was involved in because I'm about, he got fired and I'm not going to be the same. But I can see you doing something like that. I think you'd be great at like a Tonight Show, a Late Show, whatever they are.
Well, thank you. And yeah, I am always trying, you know, and I've done a couple. I had a car show for a year. I did a show called Inside the Vault, and it was kind of like a men's talk show with Chris Collinsworth. That was a lot of fun. And you know, these things I've had one season of a couple of shows. I was joking with Aisha Tyler once. I'll never forget. I was like, Aisha, what's it like to do season two? I've never She was like, "Oh, it gets good after season two, you know." So, you know how this business is, Eddie. You just keep trying. So, yeah, even now during this pandemic lockdown, I'm working on a pitch, and
Good. That's
hopefully
what
it
you
comes
use your
back. You
time
know,
for.
it's this is the business, man. So I ain't going nowhere.
Good. I'm glad to hear that. You brought up cars. You are very much into motorcycles and cars and all, and you've done Jay Leno's garage a number of times. How'd you get interested in that?
Ever
Did
since I
that
was a
from-
kid. Ever since I was a kid, I've been a gearhead. I was one of those kids that would hear a car and go look at. I had to see what just drove by, And this is
Right.
I was a kid in the '60s when we had muscle cars, so it'd be a Camaro or a Firebird or a Mustang or something
Yep.
like that. And I fell in love with motorcycles. My grandmother had a farm in South Carolina, and there was a guy who rented land from her who rode motorcycles, and I fell in love with that, and that's never gone away, right? So now
Mhm.
as an adult, I got to play with a few. And then it was funny how it came together in the comedy world. As people found out I was a gearhead, I started getting invited to do things, So I'd
Right.
be at a motorcycle event and they'd be like, "Oh, Alonzo's here. Hey, come say something or do this or do that." And the thing with Jay was it was such a natural fit. The first time that I did the Tonight Show, we talked for like 5 minutes about cars, and we just hit it off there where we didn't talk about comedy or TV
Mhm.
or anything. We would just talk about cars and bikes and so on. And then when and I tell everyone, and you know this because you know Jay, Jay's Garage is what Jay would be doing if he didn't have the show Jay's Garage.
Right. That's right.
It's like, yeah, let me have some friends over
Jay would
and
be a
play with my
mechanic.
toy collection, right? So
Mhm.
it was such a natural fit. And what's become funny about it is now, whenever he has a funny or weird motorcycle, I get the call. We have an episode coming out the first week of July. We had this bike. Some guy in Portland made it. It's a motorcycle with a sidecar that's a barbecue grill. It's an actual, what is it, Traeger or whatever, those high-end barbecue grills. That's the
Yeah.
side. So we rode around cooking burgers while we rode. We would like stop
Oh
at a
my
light,
God. I
get
gotta watch
the bike
that.
and flip the burgers. So that's the next one that's coming on. It's so much fun. It's so much fun. And I've been lucky enough to be invited by companies like, we're launching a new motorcycle. We want you to come ride it and stuff like that. And I
Oh.
tell everyone, Eddie, and this is the difference, they lend them to me, they give them to Jay.
Oh, I love it. Eventually they'll give them to you. You have a lot of a number of motorcycles, don't you?
Yeah. I've got a couple of BMWs, Triumph, a Honda. I call it my Jay Leno starter set. That's what I call my garage. That's my
Starter set.
Jay Leno.
I had a Triumph that I drove through Europe
Oh,
uh,
that's awesome.
way back in when the heck was this 72 or 3,
Hmm.
which I loved. However, that was the period when Triumph really sucked,
Yeah.
and they were about to go out of business. And while we were in Europe, I think they went out of business because our bikes broke down and we couldn't get them fixed. Nobody
Mhm.
wanted to touch them over there for whatever reason. But I loved it. It was a dirt bike
Yeah.
with the 2 raised exhausts or whatever on one side. It was like an unbelievable experience. The Triumphs were great. Where, God, you won Last Comic Standing in the 3rd season, I think.
Yeah. Hmm.
And how did that play a big part in launching you too?
Oh, that was huge. That was my introduction to America. And
Mhm.
as you know, the Hollywood Club back then was a big part of Last Comic Standing,
Right.
right? So my first audition was you come in and you do 2 minutes in the afternoon for Bob and Ross, right?
Hmm.
And then you get invited to come back that night and you do 5 minutes and so on. So that was great. That when we got to the show, when we got down to the 10 comics who competed, it was me and John Heffron and Tammy Pescatelli, Corey Holcomb, Gary Goldman, Todd Glass, Kathleen Madigan, Jay
Wow.
London.
Uh-huh.
You know,
Heavy company.
yeah, definitely. We had a meeting, and Jay Moore, who was a co-creator and the host then, he said, "Listen, we're about to put you on national TV every week. If you don't at least triple your income after this, that's your fault." And that's what it was. It was such a big recognition. Now looking back, Heffron and I, because me and Hef did this a lot, and we went have a long history with the show. He said, "Yeah, we walked away from Last Comic Standing with tens of thousands of MySpace friends."
Wow.
So,
He won one year too. Didn't John win it once?
yeah, John won season 2. But the
Wow.
difference then and now is when we did it, social media was just in its infancy. So we didn't have Twitter and Facebook and all of that. You had to go to the show. The show had like a forum page, so you had to like create a screen name and log in to send
Yeah.
us messages. So I joke like, yeah, back then someone had to work to hate you. They had to put some
Yeah.
time in. Now it's instant,
Yes.
So,
Right. It's just out there.
yeah. It was a great experience. So it was a lot of fun and definitely my introduction to America.
Yeah, I used to love watching the people audition, and everybody would be outside just having a heart attack. Like, am I going to get in time? Or am I the end of the line, or what? And all that. And was that the last year for Jay? 2003?
No, it was '05, and yes, it was, and I was part of that. And I'll tell you the story. So they did season 2. John Heffron won. Then they called us all and they said, "Hey, we want to do a season, the comics from season 1 versus the comics from season 2." And back then it was a reality show. We lived together and they did
Right.
the whole thing. They said, "No, we're not going to do any of that. We're just going to have you comics compete every week, kind of like a tournament."
Mm-hmm.
So we're going through it. So we get to the final 4, and it was me and Heffron and I want to say his name. What's his name? Martel. I can't remember. It was a guy from Minnesota, funny guy, and it was Rich Voss. It was the 4 of us. So we do the show, and what we would do is we'd always do the show, and then they'd have the voting, and then the results would come out the following week, right? So we've done the show. They've done the voting. NBC cancels the show. And we're like, what? And it was like, yeah, NBC said, we're canceling the show. So then it became, well, who won? Well, I don't know. So this is like Wednesday morning, like after we've done the show and nobody knows who won. So it's canceled. No, it's coming back. No, it's canceled, this and that. So the following day, so Thursday, Jay Moore is on like Good Morning Phoenix or something. I think he was working the Tempe Club or something like that. And he said, listen, NBC screwing around, forget it. Alonzo Bodden's the winner, right? So I get the word from Jay London. Jay comes, we're on a tour. We're doing live shows somewhere. And Dave's like, man, you won. And I'm like, so I call NBC, right? Did I win? I'm trying to, and they're like, we're not saying, and now there's a big controversy. Jay let this out. Jay's going to get fired because NBC is mad as hell at Jay for doing this, because now if you can't do the show if the words already. I'm like, did I win? And if there's no show, do I still get the money? That was my question. Do I get my money? And they were like, they're still not admitting it. They're like, whoever wins does get the money. So I'm like, all right, I'm cool, because people were mad. I knew that, like, this is a network, right? So when NBC cancels a show, they don't give a shit about me.
Right.
It's not about me, or it's like, for whatever reason, somebody in some ivory tower made a decision that we don't want this show on Tuesdays at 8:00. Now, Jay caught all kind of flack and all kind of hell for that. And
I remember very well.
they ended up doing this little half hour. It wasn't even a show. I'll call it a presentation. So I lost a lot of the publicity and fanfare that you would get for winning the show, because they didn't do a full episode, but I did get to keep the money.
Hey, the bottom line is that's what it's all about. You get the money, and then you can do whatever you want to do.
Again, it's one of those things you learn in this business, right? It's a business. And like I said, whoever made that decision at NBC has no idea who I am, and doesn't, so So I was upset, but I wasn't like mad. You know what I mean? I got some
Right.
jokes out of it. I remember because this is back, and I don't know if you remember. This is back when like UPN was starting,
Hmm.
and when
Oh, I
networks
do. Yeah.
started, for some reason they would have all black shows. So UPN is showing like, Homeboys in Outer Space or something like that. And I was like, oh, NBC was mad because the black guy won and I'm supposed to be on UPN. And I'm doing those kind of jokes, right? And I'm
Right.
laughing about it because what else are you going to do? Am I going to walk around mad at NBC? It's how TV works. TV
It's it's
is
ex-
what it
it's
is.
it's
There's a
exactly.
thousand things involved that you don't know about.
Yeah, that's so true, and it's something that I've always thought. The part of me that's an actor, like when you go and audition, and this is just along these lines, and you do something crazy and you don't get the part, and for 10 years it's bugging you. That's why I didn't get the part, because I did that. And I did that with what is it? It was a cattle call for this one line, and everybody was going in and going in. The line was freeze, police, and when it was my turn, I said to the casting director, "Could you do me a favor? Please just go in and introduce me, and then I'll come in." She looks at me and then goes, "All right," and she does it. Well, I slam through the door and I yell, "Freeze, police!" Not knowing who's in there or what's going on. Turns out there was like 5 or 6 guys, women, whatever is sitting there. 2 of them literally fell off their seats because I startled them. So I do that and I leave. And the casting director, who I knew, I figured there is no way in hell she will ever call me back again. And I'm thinking about this for a year. And eventually I see her and I mentioned this to her. And she said, "Oh, I don't even remember that. Is that what happened?" I, my point being, it's like, yeah, it's not against you or us or whatever. You know what? For whatever reason, I didn't get the part, not because of that. It was whatever. But the same thing along the lines of what you said with, and it's not personal. With
Well, the other thing is, and again, this is a unique experience you have, and you will never tell. And I know you will never tell. But no matter who the TV star is, 10 comics funnier than them.
Oh yes, yeah. Mhm. I know. And that's right too. And the only annoying thing about that is listening to other comics. Like if you have that show on,
Yeah.
people saying things like, that it's that should be me or blah 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 blah, and you go like, guys, there's a lot of room at the top.
Yeah.
There's more than we think. It's got nothing to do with you generally, and I've seen people yell at the screen, "That should be me in that part," and I'm going, "Oh my god." It's like, are you that stupid? you know
Yeah. That's the way to guarantee it will never be you in that
that's
part.
right. And
Because not only are you yelling it, you're yelling it at the worst place possible. You're
yes,
yelling it at where the exec producer of that show might be 2 seats down from you.
yes,
Be like,
yes,
all
yes.
right, put him on the asshole list.
Oh, that is so funny. I like that. God, I don't want to keep telling little stories, but that reminds me of the story of Anthony Clark. Eventually I had to toss him out of the club because of his behavior. And the next week, in walks whoever the showrunner was for
Yeah.
his club, for his show, and he comes up to me, and after a while, he's there with another guy that comes in all the time, and he says, "You want to know why I'm here tonight?" And I'm thinking he's going to give me some shit about Anthony, like, you shouldn't. He goes, I'm here because you threw Anthony Clark out, and I know I won't run into him here. Like, that's how much disdain he had, for him. But yeah, it's a crazy, my position is crazy. I am, I've said this before, I feel very fortunate that I've been allowed into the comedy community. I am not a comedian. I'm an actor, a bartender, but, to have been friends with so many people in the comedy field has been like a blessing. It's been great. I mean, I would have never known all the people that I know had it not been for the improv and bartending.
One of the things that I love about being a comic and the improv is one of the places, like, comics are comics, right? Mm-hmm. Being famous, being rich, that doesn't get you any extra when you hit the stage. So I think we get along. Like, when you talk about being part of the family and part of the fraternity, like, you can talk to like Drew Carey doesn't have any ego when he comes to the improv. I mean, he doesn't want you asking him to be on a show and all of that nonsense, right. But he's a comic when he comes to the improv and he goes up on stage or anybody, Rogan, right. or whoever the case may be. When you go there, you're a comic. Get on stage, be funny, and you talk to the other comics. We hang out at the bar, we talk to you. It's not like acting where there is, a red carpet and a bunch of security and a this and that and the other. We're like, man, that ain't gonna get you 2 laughs. So get up there, let's see what you got. Let's see who you are. And I love that. So when you talk about being part of the comedy world, after a certain point, I mean, you gotta earn your respect. But once you've earned your respect, then you're a comic, and you're a comic amongst comics. So that's one of the great things about the improv is, the stage, right, is always the great equalizer.
Oh, for everybody, you're so right. And even like, being at the bar, people come into the bar. I me, I don't care who you are. You're going to get treated the same. It's like I've had only one person in all my years has actually said this to me. And I'm not going to mention her name. She was a pretty big star on a sitcom back in the, I guess the early 80s or whatever. And she was just being really a jerk and rude or whatever. And I don't remember what I said to her, but I know she said to me, "Do you know who I am?" And I just shook my head and I said, like, "I don't give a shit who you are." I said, "You're just rude." It's really that simple. But it's like, to me, everybody's the same. It's like, I have what you want,
Yeah.
It's like, no matter what it is, alcohol, soda, whatever, you got to get it from me. And, if you're going to be a jerk, you're talking to the wrong guy. It's like, it's going to come back at you. And, but all that aside, you're getting back to your career. You've done voiceovers on games and stuff like that. And I mean, you've got a great voice. It's very obvious.
Thank you.
And for that kind of thing, how'd you get started in that?
Well, yeah, voiceover I love doing it. It's a tough gig to get in. But the way I got in, when they talk about luck and knowing somebody, so one of my first jobs, I was a truck driver for the kids show Power Rangers. Mm-hmm. This is before comedy's full time. I'm driving like, camera trucks and towing the makeup trailer and this and that. And it was a great job. It was really fun at the time, and the timing worked with being a comic. So anyway, one day I'm at craft service, and for anyone listening to this who doesn't know, craft service is the snack table, which is where you will find the drivers most of the day.
Right.
And a sound guy hears me talking. He's like, "Wow, you got a great voice. You want to be a monster?" And I was like, "What?" He says, "Yeah, you want to do the voice of one of the monsters?" And I was like, "You mean as opposed to driving a truck and standing out in the sun?" Yeah. And I went in and I did a monster, and they liked it, and I ended up doing a few "Welcome Rangers, I will destroy you," and it was
Oh,
fun. And then in comedy, you're working and this and that, and I got a voiceover agent and started doing auditions. And what I tend to get, I've gotten a couple of things, but I get a lot of video games as like the creature or the bad guy or the monster in the cave and stuff
uh-huh.
like that. And it's really fun. And people are like, what game you're on? And this is the funny thing about doing games. They're recorded way in advance, right? And you sign a non-disclosure agreement when you do it because the game world has become like this big thing that people want to know what game's coming out, what version of this and that. Now, I'm not a gamer, so I'm not expert, but people will ask me, and I'm like, I don't remember because I did it like they recorded this a year and a half ago, and I signed an agreement
Right.
not to mention the name. So I'm not sure. I haven't done any of the big like Call of Duty or anything like that, but the ones I've done, it's always fun. It's always a lot of growling, screaming, and attacking. And
That has got to be a blast because just from the little bit that you did before, it's like it's just so much fun to pretend, to like to be a monster and to
yeah, and
develop whatever the voice is or whatever it is you do, It's like it's just got to be a blast, something like that.
the funny thing about it is they're showing you the monster or whatever creature you are on screen, and you have to act it out while you're saying it. Like in other words, you're throwing a punch when he punches, and you leave the booth. Sometimes you leave the booth sweating because it's like,
Mhm.
yeah, I had to do that to make it sound
Right.
like I was doing it. Now I'll tell you my favorite voiceover story, and if I ever meet Danny Glover, I'm going to
Hmm.
bring this up to him. So Guinness Beer is doing this big ad campaign, right? And it's a whole story about Guinness and jazz and like from the 20s to today, how it was cool and this when it came to Ireland. And I'm doing the story, right? And I had heard this jazz record, and this guy had this voice like it was cool, the only thing about jazz. So I'm doing the whole thing in this voice, right? And they loved it. They loved it, Eddie. And then they had me do like a script, like they paid me like I auditioned, and they said, yeah, we want you to read this, 10-minute story. And I'm doing the story, and they love it, right? And my voiceover coach, she got me in the audition. She calls me, she says, they went with Danny Glover. And I was like, let me tell you something. Danny Glover is still spending Lethal Weapon money. I
Oh
needed
yeah.
this job. All right, Danny, get out the way. You didn't need this job.
Oh, I
I
know.
needed this job.
Isn't that funny? Yeah, that's the way it is, It's like, and I guarantee you, he didn't audition, you
No,
know.
no, but if you're going to get bumped by an A-lister. That's what I say.
You have, I know you have at least one brother. Do you have more siblings?
Yeah, I have a brother and a sister. My brother's obviously famous as I donated a kidney to him, and he
Mm-hmm.
inspired the donate a kidney bit, which was pretty popular. But yeah, I have a brother and a sister, three of us. I'm the youngest, but we're only 3 years apart, so there isn't a big difference between the oldest and the youngest. And I'm the funniest, although
Oh,
my
I'm
mother was
sure.
funnier than me. She was my
You
mom.
got you have to get it from somewhere in
Yeah. Oh
general.
man. My mom, I tell everyone, my mom, she wasn't just funny, she was inappropriately funny. And that was my favorite thing. My mom would be funny in situations you're not supposed to. So she was from South Carolina. And if you've ever been to a Southern black funeral, you know that there is nothing there but it's big. It's
Yeah.
drama and songs and food, and they love whoever died. Oh, we love him. Oh, it's too soon. Oh Lord, why you take him, Lord? And my mother leans over to me. She says, "Yeah, they yelling too soon, but You don't see any of them jumping in that hole, do you? And now I'm the kid laughing at a funeral. I'm at a funeral laughing, and my grandmother's looking at me, and I'm like, she said a joke. I will
Oh,
I
I
lost
love
my
it.
mom a few years ago, but I will always remember my mom as the one person who could make me laugh anytime.
That's great. That's a. I mean, you don't need another memory. That's probably the ultimate. You before we go, you have a podcast out now. You
Yes, I do. My podcast is called Who's Paying Attention? And it's me and my views on the news and stuff like that. The way it came about, this is also the name of my first Showtime special. The news has become a thing that it's not really the news anymore, right? It's like they don't it's not that they don't tell the truth. They don't go after people. Like I joke, like back then I started this in '08 and I was like, do you think Walter Cronkite would have put up with Sarah Palin? Like
Mhm.
that would have been one question and he'd be like, go read a book, and 60 Minutes. And again, Eddie, you're old enough, you know, 60 Minutes used to scare the hell out of people, right? If 60 Minutes came to your
Right.
door, you were running out the back. They'd have a camera crew in the alley to catch your ass. Now 60 Minutes is like, hey, let's sit on the couch and talk. So I like to go at like say the things that for one thing it's stories that I'll do jokes about, but this is the real story behind it. And then it's other things, and you can see I have the tattoos, right? And the jester was my first tattoo
Okay.
because the jester was the one who could make fun of the king. The jester's job was to tell truth, speak truth to power, tell the truth. The emperor has no clothes, whatever. And I'm still like, yeah, that's what comics do. So even now, when people are like, is comedy going to come back after the pandemic? I'm like, we'll always come back because we're going to tell the truth.
That's
We're
right.
going to be the ones who tell the politics involved, the
Hmm.
science, the ridiculous conspiracy theories. Well, it's like, listen, I promise you 5G did not give you the coronavirus. Okay. And I know it didn't because I have T-Mobile. And if 5G was involved with my crappy service, I'd be fine. So
Yeah, no, I love that. The comedy will never die. I don't care what happens. I mean, people need people to make them laugh. There's that escapism, and I don't care if it's political jokes or whatever. We all need to laugh, especially at a time like this. It's so screwy out there, and like you said before, you don't know who's telling you the truth or making things up. I mean, it seems like everybody is these days. I mean, I think I'm going to make up my own like little pandemic thing at some point when I want a few weeks off from work.
yeah,
It's like go like that.
it really is, and it's really funny. The whole thing is funny, and that's where comics come in, right? Because when
Mhm.
we look at you're really an armed protest to go to the beach,
Yeah, I
and
know.
yet you don't believe in the pandemic, you don't believe in the germs or this or that, but you're wearing sunblock, aren't you? What the
Yeah.
hell?
Sunblock and a mask.
Yeah, there's so many
Alonzo.
so many things it will ultimately be the comics that take it apart and tell the truth. And this is what goes back to Carlin, right? Can you
Hmm.
imagine if George Carlin was around today in this era?
Oh,
Uh,
oh,
you
wouldn't
know,
he love it?
there was no one better at skewering society. So I think that's always going to be our job. I'm happy to be one of those. And you're right. The escapism, there are comics who are total escape because they're going to come up with whatever. It'll be storytelling. It'll be this, that. There's so many aspects of it. What I love about comics is I'll think of something and then someone thinks of something else. And the highest compliment, as you know, the highest compliment a comic can give another comic, damn, I wish I thought of that.
Yeah, that's right. Or stealing that from them, you
Well,
know.
again, something else that you see, and you're a good guy. If you ever wrote that book, people would be like, "Oh, no wonder he was always funny a week after someone else was funny."
That's right. Alonzo, thank you so much for doing this. I really appreciate it. This was great. I mean, this was everything I hoped it would be. But I have a little gift for you, and that is a T-shirt for Eddie's Bar at the Improv.
I love it.
This is
I
for
love
you,
it.
and it's one of a select 200 that I have made up, and I will send this to you. And again, thank you so much. This has been a blast. I've really enjoyed this. This has been
Eddie,
fun.
I look forward to you pouring my cranberry juice, my friend.
I look forward to that happening very soon, I hope, and us getting back to doing this at the bar. All right, Alonzo, guys, thank you very much. Mike Carano, thank you very much, my partner in crime here. And we will see you all next week. So in the meantime, everybody, be well and stay safe. Out.